Welcome. You're ready for today's webcast, and so are we. Please note that this webcast is being recorded and the on-demand replay will be made available via email, along with a download of the slides in a few business days following the webcast. For the best webcast experience, we recommend viewing today's event via laptop or desktop while using Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. Please ensure you have a reliable internet connection, all other applications are closed, and that your pop-up blocker software has been disabled. We want today's webcast to be as interactive as possible, so please send us your thoughts and questions throughout the presentation. During the live broadcast, we will answer as many questions as time allows. Next to the slide window, you can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box and hit submit. In the resource list widget on the dock, you can access today's content-related handouts. To stay updated on all of our future programs, sign up for our webcast digest today by visiting the call to action window on your screen or by visiting the resource list widget on the dock. To determine your CPE progress, click the CPE widget on the dock. You must remain logged in for the entire program, and you must respond to at least 75% of the polling questions to be eligible for credit. You must also be individually logged into today's program, meaning one person per computer. Group participation will not be awarded credit. Once you've met the minimum CPE requirements, click the View Certificate button to download a copy of your certificate. Note that CPE credit is available for live webcasts only. If you experience any technical issues viewing or hearing this presentation, slides not advancing, or the inability to answer polling questions, please refresh your browser window. If you continue to experience issues, click on the question mark Help widget on the dock at the bottom of your presentation window. Please note, if you're viewing today's webcast in full screen mode, you'll not be able to see the pop-up polling questions. If a polling question is announced and you cannot see it, please be sure to exit full screen mode. And now, please welcome our host for today's webcast.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our session today about the power of nearshore outsourcing for the mid-market. I'm Fabiana Corredor. I'm part of the marketing team here at Grant Thornton and Oxys, and I'm very happy to be facilitating the session today and being with such great speakers and specialists on this topic, Jose and Keith, which I'm going to let introduce in a second. I think, as you probably saw on the invitation, we have a lot of different topics that we will be covering today. To give you a little bit of background between the relationship of nearshoring with Grant Thornton, all of us here today, Jose, Keith, and myself, were part of the advisory practice at Grant Thornton, but we came from a recent acquisition from September of last year from Oxys. Oxys is a transformation AI and nearshore outsourcing company that has been around for over 30 years, helping companies both in mid-market and enterprise optimize their business operations. And nearshore shared services from Latin America has been one of the key levers that we have been leveraging for helping our clients achieve those levels of optimization. So we thought that since there's been a lot of interest within the Grant Thornton community, to give you some more awareness and education of the benefits that you should be getting by considering these type of models from Latin America. So with that, I want you to hear a little bit about the background from Keith and Jose before we get started. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Keith, to give a little background.
Thanks, Fabiana. So great to be here. So as Fabiana said, I'm a partner with Grant Thornton. My role basically is to work with clients on our BPO side of the business to solution how they maybe would leverage shared services or nearshoring or outsourcing as part of their transformation journey. By way of background, I've been in the shared services BPO space since 1999. So a really long time working with companies on using BPO and shared services as a lever for transformation. I've opened and operated shared service centers in Europe and Asia, Latin America, as well as in North America. So looking forward to a really good conversation about how we see companies leveraging nearshore as part of that transformation journey.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jose Alvarez. I'm the IT Managing Director for the IT outsourcing practice for Oxys and Grant Thornton. We came as part of the acquisition. I've been doing outsourcing for large organizations for the last 30 plus years, focusing on helping organizations to transform and get into an operational stability and outsourcing. In the last few years, working a lot with the Nearshore. So I hope that I can give you a point of view from an operational perspective, which is my area, out of the topic that we're discussing today.
Thank you, Jose. So as a quick reminder, in terms of the key learning objectives and some of the topics that we're going to be covering, I know some of you are relatively early in this exploration of nearshoring. Some of you may actually be already implementing nearshoring and are just looking to get updates on the latest trends. The reality is that Nearshore has been around for a few years now, but has just been accelerating, and a lot of the trends and a lot of the locations and a lot of the processes that companies have been considering are quickly changing based on the market trends. So the idea is, even if you're not new to the Nearshore topic, to get a good understanding of some of the latest perspectives that we're seeing in the industry. We're going to be talking a little bit about countries to consider, functions to consider, pros and cons of trying to open your own operation versus going through an outsourcing provider, how to really think about mixing automation and AI together with nearshore or offshore. So please, we want to make this very interactive through the Q&A. So as you could see, there's a Q&A section. Feel free to start submitting your questions, your comments, specific processes or functions that maybe you are more curious for us digging a little bit deeper. And we'll make sure to address those questions as we go through the discussion. And I think in general, one of the key things that it's important to understand is what are those macro trends driving the interest on nearshoring. And the reality is, based on all of our latest CFO survey reports from this year, cost optimization continues to be a very, very important factor in companies' priorities. Over 87% of CFOs are still prioritizing some type of cost reduction initiative. 3 in 4 organizations are looking into piloting AI, but a lot of them are struggling with really scaling and maximizing the ROI from AI. We continue to have challenges on retaining and attracting the right talent. For example, we focus a lot on the accounting industry. We know that the CPA talent in the US is, continues to be scarce. Big Fours are struggling with accounting acquisition the same way with mid-market. So in general, the other key factor within private equity and mid-market that we're seeing is M&A acquisition activity is starting to pick up and continues to increase. But as part of the value creation, companies are having challenges on really achieving that value creation because of the integration challenges, because they don't necessarily have a playbook on how to achieve those expected synergies. So all of these elements are kind of like coming together to make outsourcing one key strategy to consider that maybe in the past was only seen as a strategy for very large enterprises, but more and more very small to mid-market companies are also leveraging that benefit. And in general, if you see based on our latest survey as well for CFOs, 82% of CFOs are already prioritizing shared services and outsourcing as part of their operating model over the next 3 years. And 65% of them are already either implementing or evaluating some type of or combination between nearshore and offshore. So if you are still operating 100% in a US-based model, you're definitely in a minority stage to start looking into why all of the other companies are doing something a little bit different. So with that, I was curious, Keith, about your thoughts, since you have been in the GBS industry for so long, on how you're seeing some of these trends evolving specifically for the mid-market.
Yeah, there's a lot here. And what's interesting about this, and let's talk through some of these kind of big areas, but what's interesting about it is that what we see is that, so the data that you were just showing, Fabiana, is that we see across the board, mid-market and enterprise, a strong interest in movement towards leveraging nearshore as a model. But the reasoning and rationale seems to vary quite a bit between a smaller enterprise, a mid-market to large enterprise, and an enterprise organization. In the macro, we do see some stuff. We see that for sure, so the data that we were talking about, cost, that's kind of table stakes in folks' mind. Whether I'm leveraging a nearshore model, an offshore model, I need to be able to realize labor arbitrage savings. But we really see this value play being a really big piece of it. And to Fabiana's point, not just on the finance side, but on the IT side, it's becoming harder and harder to recruit and retain the right talent. So we really see companies saying, yep, I need to realize cost savings, but I really have to be able to have the right talent or I can't execute and run my business. Then one of the trends that we see that's really something that's in the upper middle market and the enterprise space is this idea behind, I've been using maybe an offshore model for a significant amount of time. Obviously, offshoring has been around now for quite a long time. And what we see is that companies have struggled, even in the large enterprise space, in executing complex processes in an Asia-based model. Not necessarily because there's worse talent in Asia, but just because the difficulty in collaboration becomes harder and harder. So we see this real trend towards companies all across the spectrum saying, let me have a model where my more complex processes are executed in a nearshore model. I still realize my labor arbitrage, but I can execute at a higher productivity level than maybe the complexities of moving offshore with those processes. So we see a really strong trend in the more complex processes closer to home, basic transaction processing stuff, maybe in an Asia-based model. And we see many enterprise customers, the way they're executing that is in this multi-hub delivery model. Just because maybe I even have a captive in India or the Philippines doesn't preclude this idea of I'd like to have more complex processes with a partner nearshore or even in a captive nearshore. And we'll get into some of those reasons why you would say, maybe I have a captive offshore and do I use a partner nearshore because I don't want two captives? So there's a lot of logic that goes behind that. And then the other things that we see are big trends in this space is, for sure, in today's world, AI, automation, these are table stakes as well in any use of a shared services model, whether it's captive in your own or whether it be your provider. This idea that processes have to be enabled with AI, processes have to be enabled with automation, that's table stakes in any shared services model. And you should be seeing this trend of maybe upfront I'm capturing labor arbitrage, but I need to be getting better month 6, month 9, month 12, month 24. And automation and AI should be that lever to help you improve and get to that place. And then the other thing we see is this trend towards end-to-end process ownership. This maybe happens a little bit more as we move up the size of the enterprise, but we really want to be able to have consistent execution of process across the spectrum. So the big thing I would say taking away from this is that we see nearshore as a lever for transformation, both in mid-market and enterprise, and maybe the reasons for that vary a little bit, but we don't see really any space that's not thinking about nearshore as a lever as part of that kind of shared services roadmap for a company. So this kind of is echoed in some of the data here that you see. And this comes from, again, a survey of companies and CFOs. Obviously cost, it's still out there as a top, but there's really a mix of the rationale behind what companies are thinking about. And when we really kind of peel back the curtain, again, this is largely about the size of the enterprise and what they're trying to get out of it. When we think about a mid-market thought process as it relates to how do I want to think about nearshoring compared to offshoring, what we see is that this complexity angle rears its head in a very strong way. And it's not because of even just the complexity of the process. It's that as you think about, let's say that you're a mid-market company and you have a need for 20 or 50 or 70 heads in a shared services capability, you have this question, which is, at what point does the break-even point on the difference in dollars make sense compared to the complexity of execution? So we'll see a lot of companies say, I've got 50 people, I want to move into a shared services environment. I want them to work the same hours as US hours. Does it even make sense for me to move that offshore for just a few more dollars savings versus the complexity of it? So we see these factors about how people are deciding how to use shared services really aligning with the size of the organization, what they're trying to accomplish.
Keith, one question that the audience has was if you could give an example of what you consider more or less complex processes.
Yeah, that's a great question. It varies significantly. What we'll see is an example of, let's just say, in an accounting function as an example. Just booking journal entries, we may see simple journal entry processing happening in an offshore model. But as we think about more complex reconciliations or reconciliation that maybe requires an interaction back and forth with someone in the US, the other thing that we'll see is maybe more complex vendor. We see a lot of reluctancy, especially in the middle market space, for third-party partners to reach out and talk to either vendors or customers in an offshore model where that kind of interaction, resolving a dispute maybe, reconciling a complex statement with a back and forth, we see those kind of more complex processes moved. We also see a lot as we think about other areas. For instance, we move into the healthcare space, like revenue cycle management processes, and those types of things. We'll see a lot of those more complex back and forth with an insurance company, back and forth with a provider. Those types of, I really want to interact with my team better. We see those moving nearshore compared to offshore.
Jose, in your case, do you want to highlight maybe some examples of higher complexity processes in IT?
Yes, definitely. I think outsourcing offshore, nearshore was looked at. Let me do end user support, help desk, which is simple functions. But now there's a lot more complexity. Now what we're seeing is that organizations are using outsourcing services to do complex IT processes like support of cloud, support of any automation, AI enablement for organizations. I mean, I've seen actually in the last few weeks that our companies, clients of us, that are asking us to support them on their AI products that they use, whether they use Copilot, whether they use ChatGPT or they use Claude, any of those products. And they're looking for forward deployed engineers, which is something that now we are producing out of nearshore centers. And a few years ago, maybe that wasn't the case. But we have complex IT functions that are being delivered very consistent out of these countries now that it is increasing.
Yeah. And Jose, based on your buyer that tends to be directly the CIO, what would you say is one key driver that maybe is different from what you see here on the list? Like, what would you say they're typically prioritizing? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing that we have to watch is the technology and the AI enablement. Everybody's talking about AI. And this is not just the CIO, but the CIO is getting pressure from the business to implement efficiencies through automation. That is known. And how do they accomplish that? They need to support the company. They need to support the organization. But if they don't have these efficiencies, then it's almost impossible, and their competitors are going to do that. Now, they don't have the budget nor the skill set to do that. When they outsource nearshore and they bring all this talent, and nearshore takes care of managing the operations by bringing ideas, innovation, technology, improvements, then things are going to move the needle, which right now, that's what we start seeing. And I think this is a factor that we need to keep watching because it's a trend and it's changing rapidly everywhere.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think with that, we'll move to the first polling question, which is really trying to understand, in your case, what are the biggest operational challenges that you're trying to solve today, or that would be a driver for you to looking into these type of models? Accelerating automation and modernization initiatives, reducing cost, addressing talent shortages, improving scalability, freeing up your team to focus on higher value activities. You can submit your top 3 options, so make sure to select at least 3. And I'll share the results with you in a bit once we have reached a higher level of responses. So we have 60%, 70%. Let's try to get that up. %, 85%. Okay, so let's see. All right, so cost continues to be number 1, 39%. followed by automation with ROI with 38%, so very close to it. Scalability, efficiency, and performance, 23%. Well, actually, freeing up comes higher, 28%. And then lastly, talent shortage is 17%. Any thoughts? Are you guys surprised with the results?
I'm not surprised about what I was just talking about the automation and modernization. I think that is slowly increasing as companies are getting the pressure. And this is very tight and related to cost reduction. If you have good automation programs and you are running the company very efficiently, obviously your cost is going to go down. And then you can be able to reallocate some of that money for new improvements and things that are going to move the company to the next level. So I'm not surprised to see that one there. Cost, as we talked before, was probably the item that or the factor that drove most of the outsourcing. But I think now it's a combination of things, not just that.
This is interesting. The one that always jumps out to me, and the one that we try to really think about a lot as we talk to leaders about where should they be taking their companies and back office functions strategically, is the last one. Bringing my team to focus on higher value activities. This, I think, is the hidden one, which is really the strategic side of the world that's kind of not thought about as much, which is, what do I want my organization to be doing? And what do I want to be doing as a CFO? What do I want to be doing as a CIO? And what we're constantly talking to companies about is this one at the bottom, which is, let's spend our time advising the business and being better partners in order to drive the top line and be a more efficient organization, and less time worrying about, quote unquote, keeping the lights on. And that permeates across all transformation, as well as using Nearshore as a lever. So I think that's the one that people don't think about so much, but it's really, I think, one of the most important factors.
No, and one that is especially challenging in mid-market, right? Because you may have a finance organization that could have 5 to 10 people, 10 to 20 people in some cases, and they're really running very lean. So the struggle of being able to focus on FP&A and that true part of higher value becomes even more challenging because they just have a really small team. Okay, sounds great. So I think with that, Jose, let's get into more specifically the Latin America market and some of the specific trends of what you're seeing with the satisfaction in the region and the growth of Nearshore.
Yeah, and this slide is interesting because people are asking, is this a trend or is this permanent? So is nearshoring becoming a thing? And the reality is that it is real. This is very real. I mean, as you see, more than 50% of the organizations are going to be doing some kind of hybrid model, nearshoring by the end of this year. So we are past that tipping point. And if companies are not thinking about this, their competitors are. So this is an advantage, obviously, to run organizations. Now, 84% of the services that we provide in Latin America are for the US market. This is not by mistake. This is designed like that. We're not talking just a global delivery model, which happens, but the market that we are targeting is the US. The infrastructure, the talent, the service culture is all oriented to the US needs. Also, LATAM, obviously, shared services are expanding and it's holding very steady. I mean, this is a growing pattern that we see right now. There is confidence. We have seen great results, as we mentioned, some of the factors, including the great talent that we get. So nobody's pulling back. This is just a continuation growth that is going to happen in the next few years. Now,
and I think
one thing that go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that point that you made at the beginning of the fact that Latin America is mainly supporting North America is a big awareness point for US executives, because it's true that maybe 10 plus years ago, LATAM was more a market to support LATAM. So companies started creating shared services just for Latin America in Spanish. But the majority, right, realized that the largest opportunity in terms of labor arbitrage was really to support North America. So actually, there's a lot of companies that have moved North America to LATAM, and LATAM continues to be decentralized, right? And in some cases, they're even doing global support for EMEA and Asia out of these countries as well. So that's really interesting. Go ahead.
And that's a good point. For example, we have clients that are based in North America, but they have presence around the world. So with our locations in Costa Rica and Colombia, we are supporting the whole world. I mean, we have 24/7 operations, and for us, not only supporting the schedules, but also supporting different languages. So that is a very common thing to do out of nearshoring as well, to help organizations that have locations everywhere. But one thing I want to mention here also that is important is that LATAM is the number one market for the tech talent. This is a known thing, and I have experienced that actually for the last 15 years or so like that, we've been working with Nearshore, especially in Costa Rica and Colombia. So it's not just that the talent is available right now, but it's keep building to scale. And there is a lot of partnership with universities, higher education in these countries just to develop these resources to be ready for this market. Another thing is the FAO market. I mean, it has double, this is very impressive that it is something that they're providing services all the time, but this validates that finance, for example, is a big market, and that's how it started outsourcing in most of these countries. But now that moved to IT, now we have a complete solution that we can provide to organizations out of the nearshore market. So
thank you,
lastly is, go ahead, Fabi, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that in terms of this slide, I think one of the interesting points that sometimes we realize is, in addition to the time zone difference, which is like a big obvious advantage of nearshore versus Asia, sometimes customers overlooked other not so obvious benefits. So I thought that maybe you could talk a little bit about some of these hidden benefits and how you see them.
And I manage operations. So for us, I think one of the biggest factors here or key areas is the turnover of the staff. You invest not only hiring and recruiting resources, but also training them to provide services. So this is a killer of outsourcing ROI. If you have a high churn, obviously with offshore models, that destroys all the knowledge, the inflates the retraining costs, degrades the service, quality over time, etc. So it is a factor that affects directly the client experience, but also production. So to me, that's one of the most important things. But another thing that is happening the last couple of years that I've seen is that if you have the right partner, you're going to be working with an organization that's going to help you to have an innovation mindset. And this is important because every single company is talking about innovation. Every single company is talking about digital transformation or any kind of automation or efficiency. So having that right partner that works with you on that and is not just an order taker makes a huge difference. We already talked about some of the other items like the complexity of these processes that now we are supporting a lot of them out of these countries in Latin America. But there's also one thing that is overlooked, and the ease of travel. We have a lot of our clients spend quite some time with our resources and our teams in nearshore, just doing training, just making sure that they can work together with collaboration. So to me, having a flight that is only 3 hours away from the US and getting to a site and you can spend time with your team, that is a game changer here. I think that's very important.
Keith, would you add anything?
I guess what I would say is that if we think about these two slides, the last two slides together, from a benefits perspective, is that 20 plus years ago, Intuit moved down into Costa Rica, and then hundreds and hundreds of multinationals followed. I think we're 350 US multinationals now just in San Jose, and then obviously across Colombia and Mexico, that number peaks 500, 600, 700 companies. And so it's not new and it's not a hidden secret. The reality is that the market originally was a very captive market. So we had large enterprise customers offering additional locations, and it wasn't a very mature BPO market. So the folks that in the middle market, where it didn't make sense to open your own center, were kind of left out of these advantages. So now that this market is becoming a much more mature BPO market, it makes more sense for the middle market. And now these types of benefits can be tapped into. So I think it's really the evolution of the market. And a lot of the things that you see here on this slide are just outcomes of being closer to home. Staff turnover is better because we're not trying to force folks in Asia to work the night shift. So obviously there's going to be lower attrition. So a lot of these things are just benefits of proximity, which are now available to the market that weren't available before.
Yeah. And I think that takes us to the next topic. And I think it connects with one of the questions that, and I don't know why it's not moving.
Yeah,
I'm
it
trying
moved now.
to, it moved?
Do you want
Yeah.
me to answer that
So
question
going back
that's
to the
in the
question
chat?
yes, do you want to answer that question?
I'm happy to. So there's a question in the Q&A which says, what is the risk of an eventual tariff levy on these types of services, and how should you mitigate that? That's a really, really, really hard question because there's a huge unknown that gets wrapped around that. The way we would think about this is there's no predicting what's going to happen or not from a tariff perspective related to these services. Obviously, it started to get talked about in the political landscape over a year ago, and we haven't seen anything come to pass, but it doesn't mean it won't. But the way that we kind of think about this is from a cost benefit perspective. If we think about Latin America, depending on the market you're in, as something somewhere between 35 to 50% labor arbitrage savings. And that's before you start to get benefit from AI and automations, which should give you a continuing improvement over time. And that should more than offset what you would have as a tariff if you just compare it to just leaving that process in the US. So we think about a back office process, which is right to be realized from a benefits perspective. You're still ahead in that game. So you're doing what's strategically right for your business and not worrying about the unknown is how we would think about that. I think.
And I agree with you, Keith. I think automation, obviously AI, all this is a key factor to address that area. Also, some kind of redundancy, and we have operation centers in different countries, and that help us to leverage any changes on any of these countries that we have to factor in. So for us, having our ops centers and having resources working for same clients on Costa Rica, for example, and in Colombia, it helps a lot also with this concern.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the topic of what processes should I consider, what do you mean with end-to-end processes? What do you mean about higher complexity? I think if you were speaking a little bit about this, but can you expand in terms of the different processes that you're seeing customers do?
Yeah, I think it touches on what we were saying before. Like if we think about another example in the order to cash space we didn't talk about, right? We can think about cash collections as an example, an area that we'll do a lot of in the B2B space, helping companies from a collections perspective. And some of the benefits you saw on the prior slide, like accent and ability to collaborate, really enables that process to be done closer to home. We see a lot of it in complex reconciliation processes, complex close interaction processes across the financial landscape. And again, like I mentioned before, we'll see this in areas like revenue cycle management, where these processes get more complex. We'll work with customers, as an example, in the financial services space, where we're thinking about things like working with customers on processing a complex loan application and answering complex questions. We see these types of things really work well in this kind of nearshore model. And we really attribute this to, as I said before, there's always this idea, well, why is it better in this model? And we, like many global players, we have centers in India and Asia, just like others do. So we believe strongly in those markets. But we also believe that this idea of I can get on a plane really quickly and collaborate, I can work in the same time zone, I can work very interactively, it lends itself to some of these other more complex processes.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because the first call that we always get is a call from the CFO, and they're typically looking into AP or maybe cash application in AR. And once they start realizing all of the record to report complex processes, including inventory and revenue accounting and fixed assets and intercompany, they start like just opening their eyes about the opportunities. And in many cases, IT and HR and customer care, whether they report or not to them, at the end, a CFO is like a catalyst of change and transformation and cost reduction programs. So they end up starting to, bring
Yeah.
others on board, what they may want finance and accounting to be the pilot. I would say
Yeah.
HR definitely is the second largest function that we see shared services operations in the countries performing. Of course, sometimes mid-market just don't have a lot of employees to support, but I also see there's some attendees here that maybe in the retail space or in the healthcare space, so they have a lot of sourcing, recruiting, employee administration to do. So we do see a lot of interest in HR as a growing trend as well.
And something that we'll talk about on a subsequent slide, the outsourcing world or the shared services world, and how you think about countries and where you should be is really a chase between what talent is found in the right market and at the right price point. And HR is one of these areas where just by the nature of how the global companies have moved into Costa Rica as an example, and have been there for a really long time, it's built up an incredible talent base in the HR landscape. So I would argue that outside of the US and a few cities in the US, San Jose, Costa Rica is probably one of the best back office HR talent markets in the world, just because companies have been there for a really long time executing HR.
Yeah. And I think the other often overlooked aspect is in general when you really start quantifying the time zone difference and also the travel duration to get to somewhere. Like if you think about, in our case, like I'm in Miami, it's less than a 3-hour flight to Bogota or to Mexico City or to San Jose. Any thoughts, Jose, on this in general? Like, I think you were talking about travel time and how your clients enjoy going to the location multiple times a year, but any thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from my perspective is operationally, I want to build that relationship and a strong collaboration between my client and my resources. And when they can plan a trip and they go a few days and they spend the time with the team and then go through the newest training or trends or anything like that, that makes a huge difference. The team feels an extension of that organization, and that creates that sense of ownership and bonding, which I think that's super important to deliver quality service. At the end, we're interested to the client experience. How do we provide a service that clients are really happy with? So having that time face-to-face makes a difference. And having a short flight and same time zone, it actually supports all this. So to me, that's something that is priceless.
Sure. And I think with that, let's talk a little bit about countries. So Keith, like, what do you think? And of course, this depends on function and goals, but what are your overall thoughts about the top locations if a company has not yet embarked into nearshoring that they should be considering, and maybe like the top tier, top 3?
Yeah. So when I think about this, I try to also take a step back and think about, am I as an organization thinking about a captive in my own situation or using a BPO provider in these markets? And something that's very important to consider is that you really want to, no matter who you're going to use as a provider, think about their capability for diversification. Because the reality is that markets change from a competitiveness of the dollar perspective, from a political stability perspective. And what you want to think about is, if you're going to pick a market, you better be really, really sure about that market and that you're going to be in it for the long haul. Because if you're not with a partner and you made a huge investment into your own center, you're kind of caught in that market for a really long time with a large capital investment. So the way that we kind of think about Latin America is that if you're going to be with a BPO provider, you want to make sure that you're in the top markets and that your provider's in those markets and they can offer you flexibility as conditions change. If we think about these markets, the way this is broken out is really the right way to think about it, is that you really have 3 markets you should be thinking about for either BPO back office or IT outsourcing, ITO back office. And you really want to think about Colombia and Costa Rica as the leading markets for BPO back office services and IT outsourcing services, with Mexico really being a place where You see a lot of folks doing light manufacturing, as well as a really big hub from an IT perspective. The benefit behind Costa Rica is that it's by far the most mature market. Companies have been there the longest, but it ends up running a little bit more expensive than maybe Colombia as a market. But it's got incredible talent. It's got incredible language capabilities. And then Colombia is a really up and coming market, amazing talent, much bigger country, and a great access to talent. So those three really stand head and shoulders above the others. If we think about the other two buckets here, honestly, Brazil is really a market for Brazil. We'll see a smattering of companies that end up that are in U.S. operations doing some work in Brazil, or a small Latin American company doing operations in Brazil. But that's really not what it's for. Brazil is for those of you that have done business in Brazil, it's a very unique, complicated market. And generally what we see is that Brazil is a shared service market for the other markets, the Caribbean, and you hear a lot about, well, should I be in Jamaica? Should I be in DR? The reality of those markets is that they're much better suited for what I'll call lower end work, customer care work, phone work, those types of things. As you think about, and if you have a care competency, you could probably get really good pricing in those markets. But if you want to expand and move into finance and accounting and IT and HR, these markets just don't have the ability to support the growth in other areas the same way that the big three do.
Yeah.
And you can really see a huge smattering of big names across these markets for sure.
Yeah, so these are just examples of companies that have set up back office operations in Colombia, Costa Rica in the last few years. So for example, us as operators in the countries, when we hire talent for the mid-market clients that we support, we actually can tap into these type of multinationals that have already extensive experience doing US payroll processing, AP for the US, accounting for the US. So it's such a great market. And I think a lot of US executives get surprised when they see this list. So with that, I'm going to open up the next question, which is, what best describes the stage of your nearshoring evaluation in Latin America? You are actively evaluating it. You are already in process of opening operations. You are already in the region and expanding. You are already there, but not really planning to grow, or you are just really at the researching early stage at this point. So with that, and in the meantime, Jose, one person was asking about specific examples in IT, the same way that we did examples on finance and accounting and HR, on what you see to be more commonly like being successful out of nearshore.
Yeah, definitely. So in IT, I see a lot of traction on end user support, which is our typical service desk, but not the typical level 1 service desk for a user. It is a combination of AI-based services with virtual agents and the people for the escalation. So it is evolving, and it's I would say like a new service. But what I see also is the backend support for the infrastructure, where we're talking about cloud support, whether it's Azure, Amazon, or server support. Network support, although was very big maybe a few years ago, it has not growing as expected, but I think all the focus right now is on what I mentioned. Now, the one that is growing the most, and this is in the last probably just a couple of years ago or so like that, is security operations. Security operations is something that companies are investing in. Companies are watching just because there are a lot of situations going on, hacking and all that. So they are now thinking about how to automate my security, how to outsource my security operations. I don't have people to manage this 24/7. So that is a growing trend as well. And I think we need to watch for that one as well.
Awesome. And really quickly sharing the results, we kind of like knew this audience was going to be more like in the early stages. So if you see 61% of you are just researching at this point, 18% are actively evaluating, 9.5% is already in LATAM and expanding, 8.9% are there and not planning to grow, and then 2.6% are in the very early stages of opening operations. So very, very interesting. So with that, Keith, let's spend a few minutes discussing the combination of labor arbitrage from nearshoring with transformation and AI and how you see the full
Yeah,
business case.
this is a topic that we talk to customers, companies a lot about. And what's important here, since this webinar is about nearshoring, is this idea behind how does this concept of transformation and how do you think about transformation link to this kind of nearshore as a lever? And that's how we think about it, is that if you think about any transformation that you're thinking about in your organization, obviously that has the pillars that go along with it. It's process improvement, it's organization and structure, and it's technology, which is automation, AI. So the way that we talk to companies thinking about this is that shared services and BPO are really levers in that transformation journey. So the question is, how should you be thinking about using those levers? And this, in today's world, there's no such thing as any conversation, an AI, not having to do with AI. Every transformation conversation talks about AI. Every BPO conversation talks about AI. So how do these things come together? So the way that we think about it is that you really want to be able to execute your AI program, but de-risk it and share in the risk to make sure that you get to the result. There's plenty of stats out there that say still today, 70, 80+% of all AI initiatives aren't realizing the benefit that they want. So how do you address that? So the way that we think about it is you pair these things together in a part of a whole transformation. So we think about realizing 25, 30, 40, 50% salary arbitrage savings from using nearshore as a lever. Then you take those savings and reinvest them into your AI initiatives. So now, as a CFO, you're paying for your AI initiatives with savings instead of a capital investment, which is obviously a win. And what you're doing is leveraging a partner that should be helping you guarantee the results of that AI work as part of the BPO contract. So now we've married these things together. I make sure I get my labor arbitrage. I still do my AI journey, but I de-risk it. And I still get another 15, 20, 30% savings at the end of that, but you're not going at it alone and you're kind of de-risking that process. So we want to do AI, but we want to do it in a sensible way. And how do we make that happen? And the way that we think about it is kind of partnering those things together.
Yeah, and I think that that connects with the next polling question, which is what best reflects your organization's approach to transformation? AI and outsourcing working best together, with outsourcing helping fund the innovation, as Keith was describing. I'd rather achieve savings through AI and automation with no nearshore or offshore, and then we're still determining our strategy. So if you could help submit your responses. And Keith, in the meantime, I was answering one of the questions in private, but the question was, for companies in the beginning stage of opening a captive office nearshore with no current presence in that country, do you see U.S. leadership move to that location for a few years to stand up? How often or how critical is it to expat to ensure success of a captive facility? Here's our host's
thoughts. What I would say is that the first consideration should be, are you the right fit for a captive? We really try to start with a kind of going in assumption that if you've got less than 100 people that you're going to move into a captive, the economics are going to be tough to make work. It's going to be hard to get to the right break-even point. But let's say that you are of that right profile and you as a company want to be in running the shared services business because you're never going to perform from a productivity standpoint as well as someone that does this for a living. But let's say that those two things are removed. You want to be in the shared services business and you have the right number of heads. I don't think it's really required in today's world. The reality is that there's strong talent running these types of processes in these Latin American large markets. So you can find, just like we have, really good operators that don't require you moving folks into the country for long periods of time. It's not prohibitive to fly people back and forth every once in a while for visits and oversight. It's easy to collaborate in the same time zone. So I don't think the expat thing and nearshore is quite as big a deal as it is in the Asian market.
Yeah. And in terms of the answers, it's interesting. 60% are still determining their strategy. 28% agree with like mixing both together, and 13% would achieve things just through automation. And I think it's interesting because a lot of clients, again, like we're not necessarily thinking about outsourcing and they're really pushing for AI alone. But when they start looking at both options together, and doing the business case and taking the payback considerations in place, especially mid-market that typically has like a lower payback expectation overall, I think that's when they just start realizing all of the savings they could be getting to self-fund that program and not being super tight with their AI promises. So any surprises there, Keith or Jose? I hopefully you
No,
gave something to
actually,
think about to the 60% of people.
yep. Yep.
So I think, and I have one more polling question to go through, but one key, like as one of the last discussion points, I wanted to just open it up for some of your other key lessons learned that you have seen of mid-market companies having a successful journey versus not having a very successful journey. What I think in general, sometimes it's not so much what you decide to do or from where you decide to do it, but more how you go about implementation and who you end up doing it with, right? Sometimes I feel people blame the concept or a specific country, but it's more about those things when it comes to execution. So any thoughts about some of these bullets here, Jose, starting with you?
Yeah, definitely. So I think if a company is thinking just to do staffing, they're not going to take advantage of all this great talent, innovation, and processes that we get out of Nearshore. So to me, that's not the right model. The beauty is to go manage services and get all these benefits that come with the services. And obviously, we just talked a little bit about moving expats or moving people to these countries and then start operations and all that. Starting operations in this country is not easy. There's a lot of laws, regulations, management of personnel, and that are not easy to do. We've been doing this for over 20 years or so like that. So obviously we have experience on how to manage and how to do that. My recommendation, if you want a quick start, use a partner. Don't do it on your own. Use somebody that can get you started. And in the future, if you want to do it on your own, then obviously move to that model. So, yeah, I just want to mention those two, Fabi.
Keith, and in your case, what thoughts do you have?
I think a lot of the pieces on that are all kind of talking about something similar. What I would say, and it's really this concept of, do I do it myself or do I do it with a partner? What I'd say is that there's some secret sauces to running shared service as well. And the two that jump to mind first is, one, the quality of the migration. It's a huge piece of it, and processes that are not properly documented, not identifying the right improvement opportunities, not building good SOPs, not having robust training. It's a huge failure point. The other thing I would say is that if we think about the right way to run shared services, we have a slide that we'll often talk about, and it says on it, centralization is not shared services, which basically means is that taking 50 people and moving them into an office in Colombia is not the same thing as running a proper shared services organization, which is about continuous improvement and having quality and quality assurance processes and training processes, and how do you build the right culture and recruit and retain talent. All those things go into how you do this the right way. And that's really the pitfall behind those things that were on that slide.
Yeah. And I think also one of the topics that we had there, I think we spoke a little bit about the multi-location trend, right? And I think that's also maybe one of the advantages in terms of how you decide to go. Like if you do this CapEx investment going on your own to a country, and then all of a sudden something happens with the exchange rate in that country or with the political stability of that country, you're kind of like stuck with your investment. But all of a sudden, when you're working through an outsourcing provider, you really did risk that because it's all more, from an OpEx perspective. You can just start moving on with the trends of your provider. Like if you think about, for example, Oxys, we opened first in Costa Rica back in 2010. That's still our largest location. But when companies are looking for a more cost-effective location and they're considering comparison in pricing with India and the Philippines, Colombia is a little bit more closer in cost. So all of a sudden, maybe they would have opened just an office in another location. They wouldn't have this consideration to quickly move across markets. And one of the things that I would also say, because we spoke a lot about nearshore, Keith, for Latin America, but when it comes to nearshore in Europe specifically, right? Like any key thoughts on that and how we're also seeing that complement?
Yeah, I think that the nearshore market for Europe is also not new. There's companies that are leveraging Eastern European countries like Poland in order to provide nearshore services for those markets. I think a lot of that in Europe versus North America, probably the biggest driver behind that is language. You see a lot of European countries still leveraging India and the Philippines as an offshore model. But when you're moving and using an Eastern European country in order to provide nearshore, it's really most often about language as a mix in combination with labor arbitrage. Like for instance, for us at Grant Thornton, for example, we'll do a nearshore model for France that's in Mauritius in order to be able to hit that language. So I think the benefits from a nearshore model are very similar in the Eastern European bloc as what we have is Latin America for North America.
Perfect. And one question that we have here as we finalize, do you have a predetermined model to plan, roadmap, the operate to transform initiatives for a customer, or is this a per client exercise based on their specific business maturity and appetite for transformation?
Yeah, it's a great question. The roadmap is the roadmap, and it's very similar by function. For instance, how you get there for IT or how you get there for finance and accounting, they're very similar. But obviously there's a ton of nuance that's wrapped around your particular situation. How much automation have you already done? Are you in an ERP that's working well for you? How manual are your processes? What industry are you in? So I think it's really, the formula is valid across, but definitely requires a kind of a detailed conversation on your situation in order to build that up.
Sure. And there's a question on PE that I'm trying to understand what she means, but it says, what are the PE risks with these outsourced models versus a local legal entity?
I didn't understand that question either. I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
So we can address that offline.
Yeah.
Just make sure that we capture what you were. But yeah, I think overall we kind of like ended up in good timing when it comes to the content. We wanted to thank you everyone for attending. Some people have been asking for the slides. We'll be happy to share the slides with you after this, especially for those of you that ask. We'll make sure to send it individually. And I don't know if there's any other key final questions from the audience, but we just wanted to share that there's a couple of resources available if this is a topic of interest. There's a lot of information on our website, especially on the Oxys.com website when it comes to nearshore outsourcing best practices. There's also some resources in the Grant Thornton website, but these are two particular reports that I would recommend you to read if you're in this process of researching and evaluating. One is the state of the shared services and outsourcing industry in Latin America, and the other one is a report that compares nearshore versus offshore benefits and models. So yes, with that, is there any last thoughts, Jose, Keith, before we say bye?
This was great.
Thanks,
I hope this was found informative and helpful for everyone.
Yeah,
excellent. Thank you so much.
For attending.
It was a pleasure to have you.
That concludes concludes today's webcast. If you have questions or would like more information after the conclusion of this webcast, please feel free to contact any of the presenters using the information found in the resource widget. We want to thank the audience for attending and for participating in today's event. We would also like to thank today's speakers for making today's interactive webcast possible. If you have met the CPE requirements for today's webcast, you'll be able to download a copy of your certificate using the CPE widget located on the dock at the bottom of your screen. You'll also receive an email with a link to download your certificate. Concluding today's live event, you'll be asked to complete a short survey. We encourage all feedback and suggestions to better improve our webcast experience. The link to download the slides remains available for a limited time, so obtain your copy today. We will also share the recording and slides via email. Be sure to connect with us on our site or follow us on social media to stay up to date on future events. We look forward to seeing you on a future Grant Thornton webcast.